Before we begin, here's a question to sit with. Have you ever stayed somewhere long after you knew it was over? Not because you were weak, not because you were afraid, but because you were hoping the person you were staying for would eventually look up and see what was in front of them? And have you ever reached the morning when you finally accepted they were not going to? Drop your answer in the comments as you listen. On the morning of their 12th wedding anniversary, Dominic Ashworth arranged for 48 white roses to be delivered to the home he shared with his wife. He ordered them from the same florist he had used for 11 of their 12 anniversaries. He specified white because Celine had told him once, early in their marriage, that white roses meant something different from red ones. That red roses were about passion and white roses were about devotion. He had remembered that. He had put it in his phone as a note. He called his assistant to confirm the delivery window. He asked for a card to be included. He dictated the message himself. 12 years, it said. Every one of them worth it. He sent the order at 7:15 in the morning from the back of his car on the way to a meeting. He did not call his wife. He did not text her. He sent roses. And what he did not know, what he could not have known, because it had happened at 6:45 that morning while he was still getting dressed, was that Celine Ashworth had already filed for divorce. The papers had left her attorney's office 23 minutes before the flower order was placed. The roses arrived at 2:30 in the afternoon. She was still home when they came. She opened the door and looked at them for a long time. Then she brought them inside. Some endings do not arrive with a scene. No confrontation in the kitchen. No raised voices. No suitcase dragged across the floor at midnight. Some endings arrive the way this one did, quietly, on a Tuesday morning, in a filing that took 45 minutes at an attorney's office and which the person who filed it had been building toward, in the private hours of their mind, for 2 years before they made the appointment. Some endings arrive as paperwork. And sometimes, because life has a particular kind of irony that is not cruel exactly, just completely indifferent to timing, the roses arrive the same afternoon. If you have ever been the person who finally made the decision after trying everything else, this story is going to find something in you. And if you have ever been the person who forgot to look until the day they stopped waiting, this story is going to find something in you too. Before we go in, one ask from me to you. If this story reaches something true in you today, right? She deserved more than roses in the comments. Let this family know you are here. Now, take a breath with me, and let us begin. Dominic Ashworth had not always been a man who communicated through gestures. There had been an earlier version of him, younger, less armored, more willing to be surprised by things, who had understood instinctively that the point of loving someone was to actually be present for it. That version had shown up. Not perfectly, not always, but with the specific trying of someone who understood that trying was the minimum requirement. That version had been present for the early years. He had grown up in Boston, the second son of a corporate attorney father and a mother who had run the household with the precision of a project manager and the warmth of someone who genuinely believed that a family was the most important thing a person could build. He had 2 older brothers. He had gone to Dartmouth and then to Harvard Business School and had entered the world of technology venture capital in his late 20s with the particular confidence of someone who had been told since childhood that rooms were built for people like him. He was 52 years old now. Ashworth Capital had 47 portfolio companies across 3 continents. His fund had returned 17 times capital to its investors across 18 years. He appeared in the Forbes list annually. His name was used in business school curricula as a case study in patient capital deployment and long-term value creation. He was, by every external measure, extraordinary. He was also a man who had not eaten dinner at home on a weeknight in 4 months. He had not taken a vacation in 3 years. Not a real one. Not the kind where you close the laptop and leave it closed. He and Celine had booked a trip to Portugal 18 months ago that had been canceled when a portfolio company went into crisis. They had rebooked for 6 months later, and he had canceled again for a board commitment. They had not rebooked a 3rd time. He had not thought about Portugal in months. He was not a cruel man. He was not an unkind one. He paid attention to birthdays and anniversaries and the specific dates that his assistant flagged in his calendar. He sent roses on the right day. He chose white because Celine had told him they meant devotion, and he had put that in his notes. He had stopped noticing that devotion required more than memory. Their marriage had begun the way good marriages begin, in the specific, grounded warmth of two people who genuinely chose each other, who knew something real about who the other person was and wanted to be in the same life as that person. He had met Celine at a gallery opening in New York 12 years ago. She had been standing near a sculpture that most of the other guests were walking past, and she was looking at it with the complete focused attention of someone who was not at this event to network, but because she found the work genuinely interesting. He had stood beside her. He had asked what she saw in it. She had told him. For 7 minutes, she had described what she saw in a sculpture that he had glanced at and moved past, and she had brought it so vividly into focus that he had looked at it again and understood something about it that he would not have found on his own. He had thought, I want to know how her mind works. They had talked for 3 hours. He had called her the next morning. In the years that followed, before the company consumed everything available hour, Dominic had been the kind of husband he had intended to be. Present, curious, the man who asked what she saw in things because her perspective was always more interesting than his first take. Then the fun grew, and growth required things. And the things that growth required were, one by one, the same things the marriage required, and Dominic had allocated them to the fund because the fund had deadlines and Celine did not. He had made a category error. He had filed his wife in the permanent column. Celine Ashworth was 44 years old. She had grown up in Atlanta, the daughter of a high school principal mother and a father who had run a small architectural firm for 30 years and who had instilled in her, through a childhood spent watching him work, the specific understanding that what you make with your hands and your mind belongs to you in a way that nothing given to you ever fully does. She had a degree in art history from Spelman College and a master's degree in museum curation from the Courtauld Institute in London, where she had spent 2 years developing the specific, exacting knowledge of what made a collection significant rather than merely expensive. She ran the Meridian Art Foundation, a nonprofit that worked to make contemporary African and African American art visible and accessible in institutions and communities that had historically ignored it. She had built the foundation from a small, grant-funded operation into one of the most respected institutions of its kind in the country, with partnerships at 11 major museums, an education program that reached 42,000 students annually, and a collection that had been featured in publications she had once only dreamed of. She had built all of this while married to Dominic. She had built it largely without his attention. Not because he was opposed to her work. He was not. He admired it, in the abstract and distant way that people admire things they do not take the time to understand. He attended her foundation galas when he could. He wrote checks when she asked. He said the right things to the right people at the right events. He had not been to a single exhibition she had curated in 3 years. He had stopped asking what she was working on. He had stopped noticing when she was excited about something and when she was not. And at some point, she could not name the exact date, which was itself part of the problem, that it was not a single moment, but a slow accumulation. She had stopped telling him things, not as a protest, not as a withdrawal, but simply because the habit of sharing had quietly died from the specific starvation of repeated inattention. She had loved him. She had loved him for a long time after the marriage had stopped feeling like the thing she had signed up for. But love, she had come to understand in the 2 years before the Tuesday morning, is not the same as forever. Love is not a guarantee of the right conditions. You can love someone completely and still reach the morning when you understand that staying is costing you the person you actually are. She had reached that morning, not with drama, with the specific settled certainty of someone who has been thinking clearly for 2 years and has finally made the appointment. The appointment had been made 6 weeks ago. She had sat in her attorney's office, a woman named Patricia Osei who had been her friend before she was her attorney and who had listened with the complete, unhurried attention of someone who understood that this was not a decision that had been made in anger, and she had explained what she needed and signed what needed to be signed and scheduled the filing for their anniversary. Not to punish him. She was not interested in punishment. She had chosen the date because it was the date that had always carried the most weight in their marriage. Because if she was going to end something, she wanted to mark the ending with the same deliberateness with which they had once marked the beginning. Patricia had looked at her across the desk and said, "Are you sure?" She had said, "I have been sure for 2 years. I am only now acting on it." Patricia had nodded and said nothing further about it. She woke at 5:45 on the morning of their 12th anniversary. Not because an alarm had gone off. She had not set one. She woke because the body understands significance even when the mind tries to keep things orderly, and this morning was not orderly. She lay in bed for a few minutes looking at the ceiling of the bedroom in the townhouse they had bought 8 years ago, and which she had made into a home largely by herself. Choosing the furniture, choosing the art on the walls, choosing the particular shade of gray in the bedroom that had taken her 3 attempts to get right, and which Dominic had said looked good, without looking closely enough to notice that it had changed twice before settling. She could hear him getting ready in the bathroom. He was up early. He was always up early. He had a board breakfast at 7 and then a full day of meetings, and she knew his schedule because she had learned, over years, to track the scaffolding of his days as a way of understanding when there might be space for them. There rarely was any more. She listened to the sounds of him getting ready. The shower, the quiet of the dressing room, the particular sound of his watch being put on, which was a small sound she had always noticed and which, this morning, landed differently because she was paying attention to everything differently. She heard his phone ring. She heard him answer it. She heard the door close behind him at 6:32. She did not get up. She lay in the gray bedroom for 13 more minutes. Then she got up, dressed carefully, and drove to Patricia's office. Patricia had the papers ready. They had been through them twice in the weeks since the appointment. Celine knew every page. She had read them with the same precise attention she brought to collection acquisitions, understanding what each clause meant, what she was agreeing to, what she was claiming, and what she was releasing. The financial settlement was straightforward. She had her own income, her own foundation, her own professional identity. She was not asking for anything that was not already hers by the terms of the prenuptial agreement they had signed 12 years ago, which had always been fair because Dominic had insisted on it being fair. She signed everything that needed to be signed. Patricia notarized what needed notarizing. At 6:45 in the morning on the day of their 12th wedding anniversary, Celine Ashworth filed for divorce. She drove home. She made coffee. She sat at the kitchen table in the house she had made into a home, and she drank the coffee, and she allowed herself, for the first time, to feel the full weight of what she had just done. Not regret. She had examined regret thoroughly across 2 years, and what she found, every time, was that the regret was not about the decision. The regret was about the marriage she had wanted it to be, not the one it had become. She grieved that. She allowed herself to grieve it for the length of 1 cup of coffee. Then she rinsed the cup and put it in the rack, and she went to her study to work. The roses arrived at 2:30. She heard the doorbell and went downstairs to find a delivery from the florist they had used for 11 years. She recognized the box. She recognized the signature white ribbon. She tipped the delivery person and closed the door. She set the box on the kitchen counter and looked at it for a long time. Then she opened it. 48 white roses. Perfect. The florist they used was exceptional and had never once delivered anything less than exceptional. There was a card. 12 years. Every one of them worth it. She read the card twice. She stood in her kitchen with her husband's anniversary card in her hand and the divorce filing sitting in Patricia's office with a processing timestamp of 6:45 that morning, and she felt something move through her that she did not have a single clean word for. Not anger. Not triumph. Not grief. Exactly. She had already given herself grief over coffee. Something more complicated than any of those. She put the card on the counter. She found a vase in the cabinet above the refrigerator. A tall, clear one she had bought years ago at a market in Portugal on a trip they had taken when the marriage still had space in it for spontaneous market purchases. She filled it with water. She arranged the roses. She took a photograph. She sent it to her friend Maya with no caption. Maya replied 40 seconds later with, "Celine." She replied, "I know." Maya replied, "Are you okay?" She replied, "Yes." Not the way you are asking, but genuinely yes. Maya replied, "I am coming over." Celine replied, "Not tonight. Give me tonight." Maya replied, "Okay. Call me at any hour." She put her phone down. She looked at the roses in the Portugal vase on the kitchen counter, and she understood that this was the last image of her marriage. Not the filing at 6:45, not the card, not the silence at 6:32 when the door closed. This, the roses in the good vase in the kitchen of the home she had made. On the anniversary, he had remembered in the only way he still knew how. She understood that he had loved her. She understood that loving her had not been enough. Both things were true simultaneously, and she was going to have to learn to hold both of them. He came home at 8:45 that evening. This was early for him on a weekday. He had, in fact, moved 2 things on his calendar to get home before 9 on their anniversary. He had thought about it during his afternoon meeting and rescheduled what could be rescheduled and left the office at 8:15 with the specific small satisfaction of a man who has made an effort. He came through the front door, and the house smelled like something she had cooked. She cooked rarely these days, but on significant dates she still sometimes did, and the smell was garlic and lemon and something warm, and for a moment standing in the entrance hall, he felt the particular version of home that had been less available to him than he had acknowledged. He saw the roses on the kitchen counter from the hallway. The vase. The 48 white roses in the vase she had chosen. He recognized it, vaguely, from somewhere, but could not have named where. He went to the kitchen. Celine was at the stove. She was wearing a dark sweater and her hair was natural and down, and she heard him come in and turned and looked at him with an expression that he read, in the first moment, as the warmth of a wife who has had a quiet day and is glad her husband is home before 9 for once. He was wrong about the expression, but he did not know that yet. He said, "They are beautiful." She said, "Yes, they are." He said, "I remembered white." She said, "I know you did." Something in the way she said it was different. He could not place it. He attributed it to the general distance that had been between them for a while, a distance he had been meaning to address, had put in his mental list of things to address, had not yet gotten to. He said, "Happy anniversary." She said, "Happy anniversary." She plated the food, and they sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she had sat at 6:45 that morning with her first cup of coffee after the filing. And they ate, and he talked about his day, the morning board breakfast, the afternoon meetings, a deal he was close to closing. She listened. She asked 1 or 2 questions in the right places. She did not tell him about her morning. He did not ask about hers. Dinner lasted 40 minutes. He reached for her hand at one point across the table, and she let him hold it, and she looked at their hands together on the table and felt something she chose not to examine too closely. After dinner, he said he had something for her. He went to his briefcase and came back with a small wrapped box. Inside was a bracelet, gold, understated, elegant. The kind of thing that costs considerably more than it announces. The kind of thing an assistant researches and a man approves with the quick efficiency of someone who wants to get this right without having the time to think carefully about what right actually means. She held it in her hands. She said, "It is beautiful." He said, "I know you like simple things." She said, "Yes." He said, 12 years. She said, 12 years. He said, "I know this past year has been difficult." She looked at him. He said, "I know I have not been as present as I should be. I have been meaning to talk to you about it, about making some changes. I know the travel has been a lot and the evenings, I am aware that I have been." She said, "Dominic." He stopped. She looked at him across the kitchen table with the specific, clear expression of a woman who has been waiting for this exact conversation for 2 years and has now arrived at the morning after she stopped waiting for it. She said, "I need to tell you something." The kitchen was quiet. The roses were between them on the counter. She told him. He did not speak for a very long time. She had not softened it. She had told him clearly and completely. The filing, the morning, the attorney, the 6:45 timestamp. She told him it had not been a sudden decision. She told him she had been building toward it for 2 years. She told him she had not told him because she had learned, across those 2 years, that telling him things required him to be actually present to receive them, and that had become increasingly rare. She told him she was not angry. She told him she had loved him and that she still loved him in the way that you love someone who was once the center of your life and who gradually became a perimeter. She told him the roses were beautiful and that she had put them in the Portugal vase because Portugal was one of the last times she had felt like they were actually in the same life together. She told him all of this with the composed, complete honesty of a woman who had been carrying it for 2 years and was now simply setting it down on the kitchen table between them. He looked at the roses. He looked at the bracelet box still on the table. He looked at her. He said, "When did I lose you?" She said, "You did not lose me. I was here the whole time. You stopped seeing me." The distinction landed in the room and stayed there. He said, "I can change." She said, "I know you believe that." He said, "I mean it." She said, "Dominic, you have been meaning to talk to me about being more present for at least a year. I know you mean it when you say it. But meaning it and doing it have been two different things for a very long time. He had no response to that. Because she was right. And he knew she was right. And the specific, nauseating weight of knowing she was right about something he could have fixed and chose, repeatedly, not to fix. That was the thing that sat in him like a stone. He asked her not to do anything tonight. She said, "It is already done." He said, "The filing can be withdrawn." She said, "It could be." "But Dominic," she looked at him, "the filing is not the problem. The filing is what I did this morning after 2 years of watching us become people who live in the same house and occupy different worlds. A withdrawal does not undo those 2 years. A withdrawal does not rebuild what was lost in them." He said, "What does?" She looked at him. She said, "I do not know if anything does. I am not saying it is impossible. I am saying I have been waiting for you to ask that question for 2 years, and you are asking it now because the papers exist, and not before." He had nothing to say to that either. She stood and cleared the plates. She told him she was going to sleep in the guest room tonight. Not as a punishment, as an acknowledgement of what the morning had been. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time after she left the room. He did not sleep. He lay in their bedroom, her bedroom now, or soon to be, or perhaps his, and looked at the ceiling and did the thing he had spent years not doing. He examined himself. Not his portfolio, not his fund, not the deals in progress, or the board commitments, or the morning schedule. And when she was already at the table, when he came downstairs, and he moved through the kitchen with his phone already in his hand, and left without sitting down. He thought about the gallery opening 12 years ago, and a woman who had stood in front of a sculpture and described what she saw in it for 7 minutes, and had made him see something he would not have found alone. He thought about how long it had been since he had asked her to do that. He thought about the roses. He had ordered them at 7:15 from the back of a car. He had specified white because he had a note in his phone. He had not called. He had not texted. He had sent an order through a florist and dictated a message to his assistant and believed, in some functional corner of his mind, that this constituted showing up for the anniversary of 12 years of marriage to the most interesting person he had ever met. He lay in the dark and felt the full weight of what that said about who he had become. Not a bad man. A distracted one, which was, in its own way, worse. Because a bad man could be clearly named. A distracted man spent years telling himself he was present enough, attentive enough, that the gestures covered the gaps, that the checking of boxes constituted care. He had been checking boxes. He had not been present. He got up at 3 in the morning and went to his study and sat at his desk without turning on the lights and looked at the dark city outside the window for a long time. Then he did something he had not done in years. He called his oldest friend. Marcus Webb had known Dominic since Dartmouth. He was one of 3 people in the world who had the specific permission to tell Dominic things he did not want to hear and had exercised that permission across 30 years with the patient directness of someone who genuinely cared about the man he was saying the difficult thing to. Marcus answered on the 3rd ring. He said, "It is 3 in the morning, Dom." Dominic said, "I know. I am sorry." Marcus said, "What happened?" Dominic told him. All of it. The anniversary. The roses. The bracelet. Dinner. What she had said across the kitchen table. Marcus listened without interrupting. When Dominic finished, Marcus said, "How long has she been unhappy?" Dominic said, 2 years. Maybe longer. She says I stopped seeing her. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "When did you last go to one of her exhibitions?" Dominic said, "I do not remember." Marcus said, "When did you last ask her about the foundation?" Dominic said, Marcus said, "When did you last take a full day off and spend it with her doing something she wanted to do?" Dominic said nothing. Marcus said, "Dom, you have been one of my closest friends for 30 years. I love you like a brother. And I am telling you as your brother that this is not a surprise to anyone who has been paying attention. The only person who did not see this coming was you." Dominic said, "I thought she was fine." Marcus said, "You thought she was fine because you needed her to be fine so you did not have to look at the cost." The sentence landed in the dark study with the specific weight of a truth that has been true for a long time. Dominic said, "What do I do?" Marcus said, "That depends on one thing." He said, "What?" Marcus said, "Whether you want to fix the marriage or whether you want to fix yourself. Because one of those you can do for her, but only one of them actually solves the problem." Dominic sat in the dark for a long time. In the guest room, Celine lay awake. Not with regret. She had been clear about the absence of regret. What she felt was something more nuanced, the specific emotion of a person who has made the right decision and is now living inside the truth of what that decision means. She thought about who she had been at the gallery opening 12 years ago. Standing in front of a sculpture, genuinely interested in a thing, willing to tell a stranger what she saw in it for 7 minutes without once wondering whether it was too much. She had been herself completely. And somewhere across 12 years of loving a man who stopped asking what she saw in things, she had become a quieter version of herself. Not broken, not diminished, but quieter. The foundation was loud. The work was full and real and hers entirely. But inside the marriage, she had gradually turned down a volume she had not noticed was being turned down until she heard the silence it left. She thought about the Portugal vase. She thought about him saying, "I remembered white." She thought, "Yes, you remembered." But remembering is not the same as seeing. She closed her eyes. She was asleep before 4. He called her attorney Patricia the following morning, not to contest the filing, not to buy time through legal maneuver. He called because he needed to understand precisely what the process looked like from here, what the timeline was, what was required of both of them. Patricia was professional and fair. She answered his questions and told him what she could tell him, and told him politely, but clearly that anything further would need to go through his own counsel. He thanked her and hung up. He called his own attorney. He gave the same instructions. Do not contest, understand the process, ensure everything is fair. Then he did something that surprised his assistant. He cleared his calendar for the week. Not the day, the week. Rachel, who had been his assistant for 9 years and who had rescheduled the Portugal trip twice without being asked how she felt about it, looked at the calendar request with an expression she did not let him see and cleared everything that could be cleared and rescheduled everything that could be rescheduled. He called Celine that afternoon and asked if he could take her to coffee. She said, "What for?" He said, "Not to contest anything. I know the filing is real, and I am not going to pretend it is not. I want to talk to you. Not as a strategy. Just, I want to talk to you the way I should have been talking to you for years, and I understand if you say no." She was quiet for a moment. She said, "Thursday. The coffee shop near the foundation. 11 o'clock. He said, "I will be there." She said, "Dominic, if you are going to be late, or if something comes up." He said, "Nothing is coming up. I cleared the week." A pause. She said, "Okay. Thursday at 11. He arrived at the coffee shop at 10:45. He had not been early to something personal in years. He sat at a corner table and ordered a coffee, and he looked around the room. A small, warm place near the foundation that she had clearly been coming to for years, where the owner knew her order and the chairs were the kind that made you want to stay. He had not known this place existed. He had not known where she went when she was near the foundation. He did not know the small geography of her daily life. He sat with that. She arrived at 11. She wore a dark coat and her natural hair was down, and she looked exactly like herself, which was something he had once known so precisely that he could have described it in detail, and which he now realized he had been seeing without looking for years. She sat across from him. The owner brought her coffee without her ordering it. He noticed that. She noticed him notice. She said, "I have been coming here for 3 years. He said, "I did not know that." She said, "I know." They sat with that for a moment. He said, "I want to tell you some things. Not to change the outcome. I know the outcome. I want to tell you because I think you deserve to hear them, and because I think I have owed them to you for a long time." She said, "I am listening." He said, "I stopped asking what you saw in things. I do not know exactly when it happened, but I know it happened and I know it was a loss. Not just for you, for me, because the way you see things was one of the reasons I wanted to be in the same life as you, and I gave up access to that without understanding what I was giving up." She looked at her coffee. He said, "I also know that I used the permanent column. I filed you there, in my mind, without meaning to, the things that were always going to be there, that did not require active attention the way the company did. And that was wrong. That was specifically and completely wrong. You are not infrastructure. You were never infrastructure." Her expression was composed and still. He said, "I am not telling you this to ask you to reconsider. I am telling you because the man I was when I met you, the one who asked what you saw in a sculpture for 7 minutes and actually listened, I want to be closer to that man again, and I cannot get there without saying all of this out loud." She said, "Thank you." It was simple, not warm, not cold, just an acknowledgement. He said, "Can I ask you something?" She said, "Yes." He said, "When did you know? Not when did you decide, when did you know?" She looked at him. She said, "The Portugal trip." The second cancellation. "I was standing in our bedroom holding the confirmation email for the rebooking, and you called to say you could not go, and I sat down on the bed, and I felt." She paused. "I felt nothing. No sadness. No anger. Just a kind of flat clarity that I did not like. And I understood in that moment that the reason I felt nothing was because I had been preparing for that call. I had been preparing for it because some part of me already knew what you would choose." He said, "I should have gone to Portugal." She said, "Yes." He said, "And the exhibitions." She said, "Yes." He said, "And the mornings." She said, "Yes." He said, "I am sorry." She said, "I know." She said it the way she said everything, directly, without extra weight. Not as a dismissal, as a fact. He said, "I know it is too late for the marriage. I am not asking you to take it back, but I want to ask you something else." She waited. He said, "Is there a version of this, of what comes next? Where we are not strangers to each other, where I get to know what the foundation is doing, where I get to ask what you see in things again, not as a husband, just as someone who has never stopped finding the way your mind works to be the most interesting thing in any room." She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "Ask me again in a year." He said, "I will." She said, "And Dominic." She looked at him steadily. "Do not send flowers. Show up." He said, "Yes." She said, "I mean it specifically and generally." He said, "I understand." She picked up her coffee. He picked up his. They sat together for another 40 minutes and talked. Not about the divorce, not about the marriage, about her work. About an exhibition she was preparing for a Baltimore museum that was the most significant commission the foundation had received. She told him about the artist, a Ghanaian-American woman who worked in textile and photography and whose work said something about inheritance and memory that Celine had been thinking about for months. He listened. He asked a question. She answered. He asked another. She said, "At some point, you used..." The divorce was finalized 4 months later. It was clean. Both attorneys described it as one of the most straightforward high-net-worth dissolutions they had handled, not because there was no complexity, but because both parties had decided that fairness was more important than advantage and had proceeded accordingly. Celine moved out of the townhouse in February. She had found an apartment 2 miles away. Smaller, entirely hers. The second bedroom a proper studio that she set up immediately with the specific pleasure of a woman claiming space she had not had to negotiate. The walls were not gray. She had chosen a warm terracotta that took one attempt to get right. Dominic stayed in the townhouse. He rattled around in it for about 3 weeks. Then he called a real estate agent. He bought a smaller place. He kept the Portugal vase. He did not call her in the first month. He had said he would give her space, and he gave it with the same discipline he brought to every commitment he actually intended to keep. He spent the first month in the specific, uncomfortable work of becoming a different version of himself. He went to therapy, not reluctantly. He had called the therapist on the 4th morning after the coffee shop, having decided in the night that the conversation with Marcus had been the beginning of something and that he needed professional infrastructure for the rest of it. His therapist was a woman named Dr. Adora Ease, who was patient and precise and who had, in the first session, asked him a question that he had been thinking about ever since. She had asked, "What do you think you were afraid of?" He had said, "I do not think I was afraid of anything. I was simply busy." She had said, "Busy is a choice. What were you afraid would happen if you were not busy?" He had not had an answer. He spent 3 months finding one. What he found, slowly and uncomfortably, was something he had not expected. He had been afraid of being known completely, not by strangers. In professional contexts, he was entirely comfortable with visibility and scrutiny, but by someone who was close enough to see the specific person underneath the specific CEO. He had spent years keeping the company at the center because the company was comprehensible. It had metrics. It had performance indicators. It had a clear language for success and failure. His marriage had none of those things. And the specific, terrible intimacy of being known by someone who loved you, of having someone see you without the company as a frame. That was the thing he had been retreating from without knowing he was retreating. Celine had seen him. He had responded by giving her less and less to see. He sat with that understanding for a long time. It was not a comfortable thing to know about yourself. It was the most useful thing he had learned in 52 years. In the spring, he went to an exhibition. Not the Baltimore one, that had opened in March, and he had not felt it was appropriate to attend without being invited. He went to a smaller show at a gallery in Chelsea, a group exhibition that the foundation had organized, and which he had seen listed on the foundation's website, because he had started following the foundation's website. He did not tell Celine he was going. He went because he wanted to see the work. He stood in front of a piece by a young artist, a large mixed-media canvas that combined photography and text and textile in a way that required standing with it for a while before it opened up. He stood there for a long time. A gallery assistant appeared at his elbow and offered a catalog. He took it and found the artist's statement. He read it twice. Then he looked at the canvas again. He understood something in it that he would not have found on his first look. He thought about a gallery opening 12 years ago and a woman who had done this for him with a sculpture he had walked past. He bought the piece. He called her in April, 6 months after the coffee shop, 1 month after the divorce was finalized. She answered on the second ring. He said, "I want to tell you something." She said, "Okay." He said, "I went to the Chelsea show, the Foundation Group exhibition in March." She was quiet for a moment. She said, "I did not know you were there." He said, "I know. I did not tell you. I went because I wanted to see the work, not because I wanted you to know I had gone." She said, "That is a meaningful distinction." He said, "I bought a piece. The large mixed-media canvas by the young artist, Amara Diallo." She said, "That is a significant work." He said, "I stood in front of it for a long time. I read her artist's statement twice. I understood something in it that I would not have found on my first look." She said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "What did you understand?" He told her. For 7 minutes, he told her what he had understood in the painting. The way Diallo used the textile layers to create a kind of palimpsest, the past always visible through the present, the way the photographic elements refused to let the eye settle. He told her what it said to him about inheritance and visibility and the specific grief of things that are present but unseen. Celine was quiet for a long time after he finished. Then she said, "That is the most you have said about a piece of art since you told me what you saw in the sculpture at the gallery opening." He said, "I know." She said, "What changed?" He said, "I started paying attention to what I was looking at." She said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "There is a dinner at the foundation in June. Not a gala. A small dinner for the artists in the Baltimore collection. I would like you to come, not as my husband, as someone who knows how to ask the right questions." He said, "I would like that very much." She said, "June 14th. I will send the details." He said, "Celine." She said, "Yes." He said, "I am sorry for every morning I walk through the kitchen without sitting down." A long pause. She said, "I know." She said it differently from the last time. The June dinner was small and warm and full of people who made things. He wore a dark suit and arrived exactly on time and sat beside an artist named James Okafor, who had spent 4 years on the piece that anchored the Baltimore collection and who talked about it with the specific, complete passion of someone whose work had cost them something significant and who had no regret about the cost. Dominic asked questions, real ones, the kind that required James to think before answering. At one point, James looked at him and said, "You actually understand this?" Dominic said, "I am learning to." Across the table, Celine was talking to a museum director about the next phase of the Foundation's education program. She was animated in the way she was animated when she was talking about something she cared about completely. She was using her hands. She was laughing at something. She looked up once and caught him watching. Her expression was not warm exactly, but it was not closed. He smiled. She looked back at James Okafor. But the corner of her mouth had moved. He asked her to coffee again in August. She said yes. They went back to the same coffee shop near the foundation. The owner brought her coffee without her ordering it, and brought his without him ordering it either. She noticed. She said, "You have been coming here." He said, "Twice a week for 4 months." She said, "You did not tell me." He said, "I was not coming for you to know. I was coming because it is a good coffee shop, and because I like being in the neighborhood where you do your work." She looked at him. She said, "That is either very sweet or very something else." He said, "I am hoping sweet." She said, "I know." But she was smiling when she said it. They sat for 2 hours. He asked what she was working on. She told him, all of it. The next collection, the artist she had been in conversation with for months, the museum partnership she was negotiating, the student program that had just received its largest grant. He listened to all of it. He asked questions. She answered them. At the end of the 2 hours, she said, "You are different." He said, "I am the same person. I am just paying attention now." She said, "That is not a small difference." He said, "No, it is not." They stood outside the coffee shop in the August afternoon. She said, "I am not ready to answer the question you asked in the coffee shop last November." He said, "I know." She said, "But I am not ready either." He said, "I understand what that means." She said, "Good." She walked back toward the foundation. He stood on the pavement and watched her go. She did not look back, but he noticed, this time, that she was walking the way she had walked at the gallery opening 12 years ago. With the specific, grounded ease of a woman who was completely herself and knew it. He had been trying to get back to the man who recognized that. He was not there yet. He was closer than he had been. Outro, 39:30, 40:00. On the morning of their 12th wedding anniversary, Dominic Ashworth sent roses. He ordered them at 7:15 from the back of a car. He specified white because he had a note in his phone. He did not call. He did not text. He did not sit down at the kitchen table or ask what she was working on or show up in any of the ways that actually constitute presents. He sent roses, and she had already filed, not because she stopped loving him, because love had not been enough to sustain a marriage that one person had slowly stopped showing up for. The roses were beautiful. The Portugal vase was in her new apartment now. And the man who had sent them was spending August in a coffee shop near her foundation twice a week, asking questions, learning to pay attention, doing the work of becoming someone who deserved to be in the same room as the most interesting person he had ever met. He was not there yet, but he had started. And starting, genuinely, humbly, without the expectation of reward, was the most honest thing he had done in years. Final question for you. Is there someone in your life you have filed in the permanent column? Someone whose presence you have been taking for granted because you believe they would always be there? And what would it cost you to actually look up and see them? Leave your answer below. Your voice belongs in this conversation. If this story found something real in you today, share it with someone who needs to hear it. One share. It costs nothing and means everything. I love you all. I will see you in the next story.